The Winchester rifle felt cold against Adelaide Zimmer's palms as she stood in the doorway of her dead father's ranch house, staring down three men who had come to claim what they said was theirs. It was August 1883, and the Montana sun beat down mercilessly on the dry grass surrounding the property her father had built with his own two hands before consumption took him 6 months earlier. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and according to every respectable person in Butte, she had no business running a cattle ranch alone. "Miss Zimmer, be reasonable," said Gerald Hatchett, the banker who held the mortgage on half the county. "A woman cannot manage livestock and ranch hands. Sell to Mr. Peterson here, and you will have enough money to move to San Francisco or Denver, find yourself a proper husband, and live as a lady should." Adelaide did not lower the rifle. "My father left this land to me, not to Mr. Peterson. The mortgage is current. I have paid every cent owed, and I will continue to do so. Now get off my property." The three men exchanged glances. Mr. Peterson, a wealthy rancher from the eastern part of the county, stepped forward with his thumbs hooked in his vest pockets. "You have got spirit, I will give you that. But spirit does not break horses or drive cattle to market. Your hands will quit within a month. No man wants to take orders from a woman. Then I will find men who can set aside their pride long enough to earn an honest wage," Adelaide said. Her voice did not waver, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Good day, gentlemen." She stood in that doorway for a full minute after they rode away, watching the dust settle on the road. Then she set the rifle aside and let herself shake. The truth was that Peterson had been half right. 3 of her father's ranch hands had already quit, unwilling to work for a female boss. The remaining 2 were old Charlie, who was 70 if he was a day, and young Timothy, barely 16 and too green to be of much use with the difficult work ahead. She had 40 head of cattle that needed to be driven to the railhead before winter, and she needed at least 4 experienced cowboys to do it. Every man she had approached in Butte had either laughed in her face or made suggestions that had nothing to do with honest work. The women in town had stopped inviting her to church socials. The minister's wife had actually crossed the street to avoid speaking to her last Sunday. Adelaide walked to the kitchen and poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. She had been born on this ranch, had learned to ride before she could write her own name, had helped her father with the books since she was 12 years old. She knew this business as well as any man, but that did not matter to people who believed a woman's place was in the home, tending children and obeying a husband. She would die before she gave up her freedom to marry some man who would immediately take control of everything her father had worked for. The sound of hoofbeats brought her back to the window. A single rider approached, leading a pack horse. As he drew closer, Adelaide could see he was tall in the saddle, with a dark hat pulled low against the sun. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. Adelaide picked up the rifle again and stepped onto the porch. The rider stopped a respectful distance from the house and raised both hands to show they were empty. "Madam, I am looking for work. Heard in town you might be hiring." "You heard I was desperate, you mean," Adelaide said. She studied him carefully. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. His clothes were worn but clean, and his horse was well cared for. His eyes, when he finally looked directly at her, were a startling shade of gray. "I heard you were a ranch owner looking for experienced hands," he said. "I have been working cattle since I was 12 years old. I can rope, brand, break horses, and I know the trail to the railhead. I do not drink to excess, I do not gamble, and I do not start fights. My name is Grant Morrison." "And you have no objection to working for a woman?" Adelaide asked, not lowering the rifle. "I have an objection to not eating," Grant said. "You pay fair wages for fair work. I will give you fair work. The question is whether you can afford me, Miss Zimmer." Adelaide felt a flicker of surprise that he knew her name, but of course he would have asked in town. "I pay $30 a month plus room and board. The work is hard and I expect it done right. I will not tolerate insubordination, laziness, or disrespect. If you have a problem taking orders from me, you can turn around right now." Grant swung down from his horse with a fluid motion. $30 is fair. When do I start?" "You just did," Adelaide said. She finally lowered the rifle. "The bunkhouse is behind the barn. Charlie and Timothy are out mending fence in the south pasture. Dinner is at 6. I expect you at the house tomorrow morning at dawn, and we will discuss what needs to be done." Grant touched the brim of his hat. "Yes, madam." Adelaide watched him lead his horses toward the barn, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a small measure of hope. One experienced cowboy was not enough, but it was a start. That evening, she prepared a simple meal of beef stew and biscuits. Charlie and Timothy came in dusty and tired, and the old man's eyebrows rose when she told him about the new hire. "Morrison, you said. That name sounds familiar." "He came from somewhere east, I think," Adelaide said. "He seemed competent enough." "If he is who I think he is more than competent," Charlie said. "There was a Grant Morrison who worked for the Bar T outfit down in Wyoming Territory. They said he was the best horse breaker they ever had, and he could read cattle like some men read books. But there was some trouble and he moved on." "What kind of trouble?" Adelaide asked. Charlie shrugged. "Don't rightly know, just heard he left sudden-like." Adelaide filed that information away. She would watch Grant Morrison carefully, but for now she needed him. She could worry about his past later. The next morning, Grant appeared at the kitchen door exactly at dawn. Adelaide had already been up for an hour, going over the books and planning the work schedule. She let him in and poured him a cup of coffee. "We have 40 head that need to go to the railhead in Billings," she said without preamble. "It is a 6-day drive in good weather. I need at least 3 more experienced men, but nobody in Butte will work for me. Do you know anyone who might be willing?" Grant took a slow sip of coffee, thinking. "I might know 2 men. Good workers, but they have had some trouble finding steady employment because they are not afraid to speak their minds. One is a former Buffalo soldier named Samuel Wright. The other is a half-Cheyenne man called Ben Whitehorse. Both are men I would trust with my life." Adelaide felt her pulse quicken. A Negro and a half-Indian working on her ranch would give the townspeople even more reason to ostracize her. But if they were good workers, she could not afford to let prejudice stand in her way. "Can you vouch for their character and their skills?" "I can," Grant said. "They are honest men who do honest work. That is all I can promise you." "That is all I need," Adelaide said. "Send word to them if you can. I will pay the same wage I am paying you." Grant nodded. "I will ride out this afternoon. But first, you should tell me about the condition of your herd and your land. I saw some things yesterday that concerned me." They spent the next hour walking the property. Grant pointed out weak sections of fence, signs of predator activity near the creek, and a few steers that showed early symptoms of disease. Adelaide found herself appreciating his direct manner and his obvious expertise. He did not condescend to her or question her knowledge. When she made suggestions, he listened and either agreed or explained why another approach might work better. It was a refreshing change from the men in town who seemed to think her gender made her incapable of rational thought. "You have a good operation here," Grant said as they headed back to the barn. "With the right crew, you could build this into one of the best ranches in Montana. But you need to understand something, Miss Zimmer. If you hire Samuel and Ben, The people in town are going to make your life even more difficult than it already is. Some folks cannot stand to see anyone breaking their rules about how the world should work. I stopped caring what people in town think the day they stopped caring about me, Adelaide said. I live by my own rules now, Mr. Morrison. If that makes me an outcast, so be it. Grant looked at her with something like respect in his gray eyes. Fair enough. I will ride out after lunch. True to his word, Grant left that afternoon and returned 2 days later with both men. Samuel Wright was a powerfully built man in his 30s with a quiet dignity and a firm handshake. Ben Whitehorse was younger, maybe 24, with long black hair tied back and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Adelaide shook hands with both of them. You are welcome here as long as you do your work and treat this ranch with respect. You will get the same wage as every other hand, and you will eat at the same table. If anyone in town gives you trouble on my account, you come tell me. Is that understood? Yes, madam, Samuel said. His voice was deep and measured. We appreciate the opportunity. Ben simply nodded, but Adelaide could see the surprise in his face. She suspected he was not used to being welcomed anywhere. With the crew assembled, the work began in earnest. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. They mended fences, treated sick cattle, broke 2 wild horses that Adelaide had bought cheap from a desperate seller, and prepared for the drive to Billings. Adelaide worked alongside her men from dawn until dusk, and they quickly learned that she was as capable as any of them. She could rope a steer, sit a bucking horse, and outshoot everyone except Grant, who had an uncanny accuracy with both rifle and pistol. The townspeople watched this development with increasing disapproval. When Adelaide rode into Butt to buy supplies, she could feel the stares and hear the whispers. The general store owner served her with a pinched expression, and the blacksmith made her wait while he helped 3 other customers who had arrived after her. She endured it all with her head held high, refusing to show any sign of weakness. Grant accompanied her on one such trip, and when the blacksmith tried to make her wait again, he stepped forward. The lady was here first, he said quietly. You can serve her now, or we can take our business to the smithy in Walkerville. The blacksmith flushed red but picked up Adelaide's horse's shoe and began to work. Grant said nothing more, but Adelaide noticed the way his hand rested casually near his pistol. She realized that while he had shown her nothing but respect, there was something dangerous beneath his calm exterior. This was a man who knew how to handle himself in a fight. On the ride back to the ranch, Adelaide said, You did not have to do that. I am accustomed to their rudeness. Being accustomed to something does not make it right, Grant said. You are paying for goods and services same as anyone else. You deserve to be treated with respect. Is that one of your rules, Mr. Morrison? Adelaide asked. There was a hint of teasing in her voice. It is, Grant said. I have found that life works better when people follow certain rules, treat others fairly. Do what you say you are going to do. Stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Simple things, but they matter. Those are rules I can respect, Adelaide said. She glanced at him, noting the way the afternoon sun caught in his dark hair, the strong line of his jaw. He sat his horse like he was part of the animal, moving in perfect harmony with every step. She looked away quickly, disturbed by the direction of her thoughts. The drive to Billings was scheduled to begin in mid-September. 2 days before they were set to leave, Adelaide was working in the barn when she heard angry voices outside. She emerged to find 3 men on horseback confronting Grant, Samuel, and Ben in the yard. She recognized one of them as the son of Mr. Peterson, the rancher who had tried to buy her land. We heard Adelaide Zimmer was hiring trash to work her ranch, the young Peterson said. His words were slurred and he swayed slightly in the saddle. He had been drinking. Did not believe it until we saw it with our own eyes. A buffalo soldier and an Indian. And what are you supposed to be? He directed this last question at Grant. I am someone who is asking you politely to leave, Grant said. His voice was level, but Adelaide could see the tension in his shoulders. Or what? Peterson sneered. You going to shoot us? That would be murder and you would hang. Nobody is going to shoot anyone, Adelaide said, stepping forward. You are trespassing on my land, Mr. Peterson. I suggest you and your friends leave before I report you to the sheriff. Peterson laughed. The sheriff? He would thank us for running these animals off your property. Everyone knows you have lost your mind, Adelaide. First refusing to marry like a decent woman and now hiring coloreds and Indians. Your father would be ashamed. The words struck deeper than Adelaide wanted to admit, but she kept her voice steady. My father taught me to judge people by their character and their work, not the color of their skin. Now get off my land. Make me, Peterson said. He reached for his pistol. Everything happened very fast. Grant's hand moved in a blur, and suddenly his gun was drawn and pointed directly at Peterson's chest. I would not do that if I were you, he said softly. Peterson froze, his hand halfway to his weapon. His two companions immediately raised their hands. The young man's face had gone pale beneath his sunburn. I am going to give you to the count of 3 to turn around and ride away, Grant said. If I ever see you on this property again, I will not be so polite. 1. Peterson's horse shifted nervously, sensing its rider's fear. 2. All right, Peterson shouted. We are leaving. But this is not over, Morrison. I know who you are. I heard about what happened in Wyoming. 3, Grant said calmly. The 3 men wheeled their horses and galloped away. Grant did not holster his pistol until they were out of sight. When he finally did, Adelaide saw that his hand was completely steady. What did happen in Wyoming? She asked. Grant turned to face her. I worked for a rancher named Thomas Blackwood. He was cheating his hands, paying them half what he promised, and when they complained, he had his son and some hired guns beat them. 1 man died from his injuries. I witnessed the beating and I testified against Blackwood in court. He had too many powerful friends and the case was dismissed. After that, I was not welcome in Wyoming territory. Blackwood's reach is long and he has friends who were happy to make sure I could not find work. So you came to Montana, Adelaide said. I came to Montana, Grant confirmed. I've tried to live by my rules, Miss Zimmer, even when it cost me. I will not work for dishonest men, and I will not stand by when someone is being cheated or abused. That is why I had no objection to working for you. You are honest, you work hard, and you treat people fairly. Those are the things that matter to me. Adelaide felt something shift in her chest. She had been alone for so long, fighting so hard to prove herself that she had forgotten what it felt like to be understood. Thank you, she said quietly, for what you did just now and for what you said. No thanks necessary, Grant said. It is just the right thing to do. That night, Adelaide lay awake in her bedroom, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. She had hired Grant Morrison because she needed an experienced cowboy, but she was beginning to realize that she had found something more than that. She had found someone who understood what it meant to live according to your own principles, even when the world punished you for it. She was also beginning to feel things for him that had nothing to do with his skills as a ranch hand. The way he moved, the sound of his voice, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She found herself looking for excuses to work near him, to hear his thoughts on various matters, to simply be in his presence. It was dangerous territory. She had sworn she would never let herself become dependent on a man, never give anyone that kind of power over her life. But this felt different. Grant did not try to control her or change her. He simply accepted her as she was and worked alongside her as an equal. The drive to Billings began on a clear September morning. Adelaide rode at the head of the small herd with Grant beside her. Charlie drove the supply wagon, while Samuel, Ben, and Timothy worked the flanks and rear of the herd. It was a small operation compared to the major drives that moved thousands of cattle across vast distances, but it was everything to Adelaide. If she could get these cattle to market and collect the payment, she would have enough money to pay off the mortgage and invest in expanding the herd. The first 2 days went smoothly. The weather held, the cattle moved at a good pace, and there were no major incidents. Adelaide found herself relaxing slightly, allowing herself to enjoy the vast Montana landscape around them. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The grasslands rolled out endlessly under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. On the third night, they made camp near a creek. After dinner, Grant found Adelaide checking on the horses. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Not at all," Adelaide said. She was brushing down her mare, a sturdy roan she had raised from a foal. Grant leaned against the fence, watching her work. "You are good with horses. Natural gift or learned skill?" "Both, I suppose," Adelaide said. "My father put me on a horse before I could walk. He said I was born to it." "He was right," Grant said. "I have seen a lot of cowboys in my time, and you are better than most." Adelaide felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "What about you? Where did you learn?" "Here and there," Grant said. "My father died when I was young, and my mother could not afford to keep me. I was sent to work on a ranch when I was 12. The foreman was a hard man, but he was fair, and he taught me everything he knew. I have been working cattle ever since." "Do you ever see your mother?" Adelaide asked. "She passed 5 years ago," Grant said. "Influenza. I was working in Texas at the time. By the time I got word and made it back to Kansas, she had already been buried for 2 months. There was old pain in his voice, carefully controlled. "I am sorry," Adelaide said. She understood that particular grief. "My mother died when I was 10. It was just my father and me after that. He was a good man, but he never quite recovered from losing her. I think that is why he let me do things most fathers would not. He did not have the energy to fight me on it, and eventually he realized I was capable of more than sewing and cooking." "You were fortunate in that," Grant said. "A lot of women are not given that chance." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Grant said, "Adelaide." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her pulse quicken. She turned to look at him. "I want you to know that I admire what you are doing," he said. "Building a life on your own terms, refusing to let people tell you what you can or cannot do. It takes courage, more courage than most people have. Or stubbornness," Adelaide said with a slight smile. "Courage and stubbornness are often the same thing," Grant said. He took a step closer. "I also want you to know that I understand if you want to keep things strictly professional between us. You are my employer, and I respect that. But I find myself thinking about you more than I probably should, and I wanted to be honest about that." Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. She had been fighting her growing feelings for Grant, telling herself it was foolish to complicate their working relationship. But hearing him voice the same thoughts she had been having made it impossible to hide behind her defenses any longer. "I have been thinking about you too," she admitted. "But I am afraid, Grant. I have fought so hard to maintain my independence. What if letting someone in means losing myself?" Grant reached out and gently took her hand. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. "I would never ask you to be anything other than who you are," he said. "I have seen what happens when people try to force others into boxes that do not fit. I respect you too much to do that. If you gave me a chance, we would be partners, equals, nothing less. Adelaide looked into his gray eyes and saw only sincerity. This was a man who lived by a code he believed in, who had sacrificed opportunities rather than compromise his principles. He was not like the men in Butt who saw her independence as a challenge to overcome. He saw it as something to admire and protect. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like to see where this goes." Grant smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through clouds. He raised her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then we will take it slow and see what happens. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other." They stood there in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, and Adelaide felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was not giving up her independence. This was choosing to share her life with someone who understood and valued what she had built. The rest of the drive passed without major incident, though they did lose one steer to a mountain lion on the fourth night. They reached Billings on schedule, and Adelaide negotiated a fair price for her cattle with the railroad buyer. It was a smaller profit than she had hoped for, given the falling cattle prices that year, but it was enough to meet her obligations and have a little left over. On the ride back to the ranch, Grant rode close beside her. They talked about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams for the future, their favorite foods and least favorite chores. Adelaide found herself laughing more than she had in years. With Grant, she did not have to pretend to be tough and unbreakable. She could be herself, complete with doubts and fears and hopes. When they arrived back at the ranch, they found trouble waiting. The sheriff of Butt was sitting on his horse in the yard, and he was not alone. Mr. Peterson and his son were with him, along with two men Adelaide did not recognize. "Miss Zimmer," the sheriff said. He was a lean man in his 50s with a weathered face and calculating eyes. "I need to have a word with you." Adelaide dismounted, suddenly wary. "What is this about, Sheriff?" "Mr. Peterson here has made a complaint," the sheriff said. "He says one of your hands threatened his son with a deadly weapon. That is a serious charge." "Grant Morrison drew his gun because young Mr. Peterson was trespassing on my land and reaching for his own weapon," Adelaide said. "It was self-defense." "That is not how Mr. Peterson tells it," the sheriff said. "He says Morrison drew first, unprovoked." "Now, I know Morrison has a history of trouble down in Wyoming. Makes me think maybe he is the violent type." "That is a lie," Adelaide said hotly. "Your son was drunk and he was the one looking for a fight." "You calling my boy a liar?" Peterson Sr. demanded. "I am calling him drunk and belligerent," Adelaide shot back. "And I am calling you a man who has been trying to force me off my land since the day my father died. This is just another attempt to make my life difficult." The sheriff sighed. "Miss Zimmer, I have got to take Morrison in for questioning. If his story holds up, he will be released. But I cannot ignore a complaint like this." Grant had dismounted and now stepped forward. "I will go with you, Sheriff. No need for any trouble, but Miss Zimmer is telling the truth. Peterson and his friends were trespassing, and they were armed." "That will be for a judge to decide," the sheriff said. He gestured to one of the men with him, who produced a pair of iron manacles. "That is not necessary," Grant said. "I give you my word I will not run." "Your word does not mean much to me," the sheriff said. "Put out your hands." Adelaide watched in helpless fury as Grant was shackled. Samuel, Ben, and Charlie had emerged from the bunkhouse, and she could see they were equally angry. But there was nothing they could do without making the situation worse. "I will come to town tomorrow and sort this out," Adelaide told Grant. "Do not worry." "I am not worried," Grant said. He managed a reassuring smile. "The truth will come out." But as Adelaide watched them ride away, she was not so sure. The Petersons were wealthy and well-connected. Grant was a drifter with a past that could be used against him. The system was designed to protect men like Peterson, not men like Grant. That night, Adelaide barely slept. She kept seeing the iron manacles on Grant's wrists, kept hearing the satisfied smirk in young Peterson's voice. By dawn, she had formulated a plan. She rode into Butte and went straight to the office of the town's only lawyer, a man named Edmund Fletcher. Fletcher was a portly man in his 60s who had known Adelaide's father. He listened to her story with a grave expression. "This is a difficult situation, Miss Zimmer. The Petersons are powerful people, and they have made it clear they want your land. They see Morrison as a way to pressure you." "Can they win?" Adelaide asked bluntly. "In a fair trial, no," Fletcher said. "But I am not sure we can count on a fair trial. The judge, Horace Turnbull, owes Peterson several favors. He might be inclined to rule in their favor regardless of the evidence." "Then what do I do?" Adelaide asked. Fletcher thought for a moment. "We need witnesses. You said Samuel Wright and Ben Whitehorse were present. Their testimony could help, though I must warn you that some people will not give much weight to the word of a Negro or an Indian." "That is not right," Adelaide said. "No, it is not," Fletcher agreed. "But it is the world we live in. Still, I will do my best for your man. Let me talk to the sheriff and see what I can find out." Adelaide left the lawyer's office feeling no better than when she had arrived. She went next to the jail, where the sheriff grudgingly allowed her to see Grant for 5 minutes. He was locked in a small cell with a narrow cot and a bucket. His face was calm, but Adelaide could see the frustration in his eyes. "How are you holding up?" she asked, gripping the bars between them. "I have been in worse places," Grant said. "Do not worry about me, Adelaide. Worry about the ranch. You have got work to do." "The ranch can wait," Adelaide said. "I have hired a lawyer. We are going to fight this." "I appreciate that, but you should not spend your money on me," Grant said. "I knew the risks when I drew my gun." "You drew your gun to protect me and my property," Adelaide said fiercely. "I am not going to abandon you now. We are partners, remember, equals." Grant reached through the bars and touched her face gently. "You are an extraordinary woman, Adelaide Zimmer." "And you are a good man, Grant Morrison," Adelaide said. She covered his hand with her own. "We are going to get you out of here." The trial was set for 3 days later. Fletcher worked tirelessly to prepare their defense, interviewing witnesses and gathering evidence. Samuel and Ben both agreed to testify, despite the risks to themselves. Charlie offered to testify as well, though he had not been present for the actual confrontation. The day of the trial, the small courtroom was packed. It seemed like half of Butte had turned out to watch the spectacle. Adelaide sat in the front row, her hands clenched in her lap. Grant stood before the judge in his cleanest clothes, his expression calm and dignified. Judge Turnbull was a heavy-set man with a florid face and small, mean eyes. He listened to Peterson's testimony with evident sympathy, nodding along as the young man described how Grant had supposedly threatened him without provocation. Peterson's 2 friends corroborated his story, though their accounts differed in small but significant details. When it was Fletcher's turn to present the defense, he called Adelaide to the stand. She described exactly what had happened, emphasizing that Peterson and his friends had been trespassing, and that Peterson had been intoxicated and reaching for his weapon first. "Miss Zimmer," the judge said when she finished, "is it true that you have been operating your ranch without proper male supervision since your father's death?" Adelaide felt a flare of anger at the question, which had nothing to do with the case. "I have been operating my ranch successfully, Your Honor. My gender is irrelevant to my ability to do so." "I will decide what is relevant," Turnbull said. "Answer the question. Have you been living alone without a husband or male relative to guide you?" "I have been living independently, yes," Adelaide said. "And is it true that you have hired a Negro and a half-breed Indian to work on your property?" "I have hired qualified men to do honest work," Adelaide said. "Their race is irrelevant to their abilities." Turnbull's expression soured. "Thank you, Miss Zimmer. You may step down." Fletcher next called Samuel to the stand. Samuel testified clearly and honestly about what he had witnessed, but Adelaide could see that the judge was barely listening. When Fletcher called Ben Whitehorse, Turnbull actually interrupted to say, "I do not need to hear from an Indian. Their word is not accepted in this court." "Your Honor, that is not the law," Fletcher protested. "Mr. Whitehorse is a United States citizen and has every right to testify." "I have made my ruling," Turnbull said. "Now, unless you have any other witnesses, I am ready to render my verdict." Fletcher's face was red with anger, but he knew better than to push further. "The defense rests, Your Honor." Turnbull did not even pretend to deliberate. "I find the defendant, Grant Morrison, guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. I sentence him to 6 months in the territorial prison and a fine of $100. The courtroom erupted in noise. Adelaide shot to her feet, shouting, "This is not justice. This is corruption." The judge's gavel slammed down. "Miss Zimmer, you will be silent or I will hold you in contempt." Grant turned to look at Adelaide, and she saw resignation in his eyes. He had expected this. He knew how the world worked, knew that men like Peterson always won. But Adelaide was not ready to accept that. Over the next week, she exhausted every legal avenue she could find. She appealed to the territorial governor, only to be told that the matter was in the hands of the local court. She tried to raise public support, but the few people who might have been sympathetic were too afraid of crossing the Petersons. She even considered trying to break Grant out of jail, but Fletcher talked her out of it, pointing out that such an action would only make things worse. Grant was transferred to the territorial prison in Deer Lodge, a brutal place where men worked in the mines from dawn until dusk. Adelaide was allowed to visit him once, and what she saw there nearly broke her heart. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes, but he still managed to smile when he saw her. "You should not have come all this way," he said. "They were separated by a heavy wire screen, unable to touch." "I will come every week if they let me," Adelaide said. "Grant, I am going to find a way to get you out of here." "Adelaide, you need to let this go," Grant said gently. "I am going to serve my time and then I will move on. You should focus on your ranch." "Move on," Adelaide repeated. "What are you talking about?" "When you get out, you are coming back to work for me, coming back to me." Grant shook his head. "If I come back, Peterson will find another excuse to come after me, and next time they might come after you too. I will not risk that. When I get out, I am going to head west to California or maybe Oregon. Start fresh somewhere nobody knows my name." "No," Adelaide said. "I will not accept that. We had plans, Grant. We were going to build something together." "Life does not always work out the way we plan," Grant said. His voice was heavy with sadness. "You are an amazing woman, Adelaide, and you deserve a future that is not constantly threatened by men with grudges. That is not a future I can give you." "I do not care about the threats," Adelaide said. "I care about you, and I care about you," Grant said. "That is why I am doing this. Please, Adelaide, let me go. Find someone who can give you the life you deserve." Adelaide wanted to argue, to rage against the injustice of it all, but the guard was already telling her that her time was up. She left the prison with tears streaming down her face, feeling more helpless and angry than she ever had in her life. Back at the ranch, she threw herself into work with a desperate intensity. She hired 2 new hands to replace Grant, but neither of them had his skill or his character. The ranch continued to operate, but the joy had gone out of it. Every task reminded her of Grant, of the brief time when she had allowed herself to hope for something more than just survival. The Petersons did not let up. Now that Grant was out of the way, they redoubled their efforts to pressure Adelaide into selling. Her cattle began disappearing, almost certainly rustled. Her fences were cut repeatedly. The bank suddenly became difficult about extending her credit. It was a coordinated campaign designed to break her will. Adelaide endured it all with grim determination, but she could feel herself wearing thin. Some nights, she lay awake wondering if it might not be easier to just give up, to take Peterson's money and leave Montana. She could start over somewhere else, maybe San Francisco or Denver, where women had a bit more freedom to live as they chose. But that would mean the Petersons had won. It would mean that all her father's work had been for nothing. And it would mean that she had let Grant sacrifice himself without even trying to fight back. 4 months into Grant's sentence, Adelaide received an unexpected visitor. A man in a fine suit arrived at the ranch driving an expensive buggy. He introduced himself as Thomas Harrington, a lawyer from Helena. "I represent a coalition of ranchers who are concerned about the Peterson family's business practices," Harrington explained over coffee in Adelaide's kitchen. "We have been gathering evidence of their various schemes for some time. Land fraud, illegal fencing of public grazing land, rustling, intimidation of witnesses. The list goes on." "Why are you telling me this?" Adelaide asked. "Because your situation with Grant Morrison fits a pattern we have observed," Harrington said. "The Petersons use the court system to eliminate people who stand in their way. We believe if we can expose their corruption, we can overturn several unjust convictions, including Morrison's." Hope flared in Adelaide's chest. "What do you need from me?" "Your testimony and the testimony of your hands, particularly Samuel Wright and Ben Whitehorse. We also need documentation of any incidents of harassment or vandalism you have experienced. The more evidence we can gather, the stronger our case will be." Adelaide did not hesitate. "You will have everything I can provide. When do we start?" The investigation took another 2 months, but in the end, Harrington and his coalition succeeded in exposing the full extent of the Peterson family's corruption. It turned out that they had bribed Judge Turnbull on multiple occasions, and the judge himself had financial ties to several Peterson business ventures. When the territorial attorney general got involved, the whole rotten structure came crashing down. Judge Turnbull was removed from the bench and charged with corruption. Peterson Sr. was indicted on multiple charges, and Grant's conviction was overturned. Adelaide was at the prison gates the day Grant was released, a full 2 months before his original sentence would have ended. She watched him walk out into the sunlight, thinner and more weathered than she remembered, but still fundamentally himself. He stopped when he saw her waiting there, surprise and uncertainty crossing his face. "Adelaide, what are you doing here?" "I am here to take you home," she said. "If you still want to come home." Grant walked toward her slowly, as if he could not quite believe she was real. "I told you to let me go. I told you to move on." "When have I ever done what I was told?" Adelaide asked. A smile was breaking through her tears. "You were wrong, Grant. You were wrong when you said you could not give me the future I deserved. The future I deserve is one where I get to choose who I spend my life with, and I choose you." Grant reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I thought about you every single day," he said into her hair. "I tried to convince myself it was better this way, but I could not stop thinking about you." "Then stop trying," Adelaide said. She pulled back enough to look into his face. "Come home with me. Help me build the ranch into something great. Stand beside me as an equal partner, not because you work for me, but because we are choosing to build a life together." "Are you sure?" Grant asked. The Petersons are facing charges, but they still have friends. There will be people who resent what you did, resent us being together. Let them resent it, Adelaide said. I have been ostracized for living by my own rules, but you live by rules I can respect. Fairness, honesty, standing up for what is right. Those are rules worth following. So yes, I am absolutely sure. Grant kissed her then, a long, deep kiss that held all the longing and fear and hope of the past months. When they finally broke apart, Adelaide was breathless and grinning. Let us go home, she said. The ride back to the ranch took most of the day, and they spent it talking about everything that had happened. Grant was horrified to hear about the harassment Adelaide had endured in his absence, and grateful to learn about the investigation that had led to his release. By the time they arrived at the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Samuel, Ben, Charlie, and the other hands came out to greet them, and there was genuine joy in their welcome. That night, they had a celebration dinner with all the hands gathered around Adelaide's kitchen table. It was loud and boisterous and full of laughter, and Adelaide realized how much she had missed this sense of family and community. After dinner, Grant and Adelaide walked out to look at the horses. The autumn air was cool and crisp with a hint of the coming winter. I have been thinking, Grant said, if we are going to be partners, we should make it official. Adelaide's heart started pounding. What do you mean? Grant turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I mean I want to marry you, Adelaide Zimmer. Not because society says we should, not because it will make things easier with the bank or the townspeople, but because I love you, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Because you are the strongest, most courageous woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my days making you happy. I love you too, Adelaide said. The words came easily, naturally. And yes, I will marry you. As long as you understand that I am not going to become some docile housewife. I am still going to run this ranch, and I am still going to do things my way. I would not want you any other way, Grant said. He pulled a small object from his pocket. It was a simple silver ring, engraved with a pattern of leaves. I bought this in Helena before I came to your ranch the first time. I saw it in a shop window and I thought of you, even though we had not met yet. I know that does not make sense, but I kept it anyway. It is almost like I knew. Adelaide took the ring, her vision blurring with tears. It is perfect, she said. They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Fletcher served as the witness and all of Adelaide's hands attended, dressed in their best clothes. The minister from Butte refused to perform the ceremony, so they had to bring in a circuit preacher from Walkerville. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame. Grant wore a new suit he had purchased especially for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Grant kissed Adelaide with such tender passion that several of the men hooted and applauded. Adelaide laughed against his lips, feeling happier than she had ever thought possible. That night, in the privacy of the bedroom they now shared, Grant made love to Adelaide with a gentleness and care that made her feel cherished and adored. It was her first time, and she had been nervous, but Grant took his time, ensuring her comfort and pleasure. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Adelaide's head on Grant's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I never thought I could have this, Adelaide said softly. I thought independence meant being alone. Independence means making your own choices, Grant said. And you chose this. You chose us. That is not weakness, Adelaide. That is strength. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time in months, Adelaide slept without nightmares. The years that followed were not without challenges. The Petersons' criminal trials dragged on for years, and while the family's power was broken, they still had allies who made life difficult for Adelaide and Grant from time to time. But the couple faced every challenge together, as true partners. They expanded the ranch gradually, buying up adjacent properties as they became available. Grant's expertise with horses led them to start breeding quarter horses in addition to raising cattle, and they quickly gained a reputation for quality animals. Adelaide's head for business and Grant's skills as a trainer made them a formidable team. Samuel eventually married a widow from Walkerville and built a small house on the ranch property. Ben Whitehorse brought his sister and her children to live at the ranch after her husband died, and they became part of the extended family that grew around the Morrison ranch. Charlie lived to see his 80th birthday before passing peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by people who loved him. 2 years after their wedding, Adelaide gave birth to a son. They named him Daniel after her father. He was a healthy, loud baby with Grant's gray eyes and Adelaide's stubborn chin. Grant was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him to ride almost before he could walk. 3 years after Daniel, Adelaide gave birth to twin daughters whom they named Clara and Rose. The girls inherited their mother's fierce independence and their father's steady temperament. Adelaide insisted that all 3 children learn the ranch business from the ground up, the same way she had. By the time they were teenagers, all 3 could rope, ride, and handle the accounts. The town of Butte slowly changed its attitude toward the Morrison family. It was hard to maintain prejudice against people who were successful, honest, and contributed to the community. Grant served on the school board, and Adelaide became involved in efforts to improve conditions for women and children in the county. They were never fully accepted by the old guard families, but they earned the respect of enough people that it no longer mattered. One evening, when Adelaide was 45 and Grant was 48, they sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were grown now, all 3 working on the ranch and starting to think about their own futures. Daniel was courting a girl from Helena, and the twins were planning a trip to San Francisco. "Did you ever imagine we would end up here?" Adelaide asked, leaning against Grant's shoulder. "Here specifically, no," Grant said. He wrapped his arm around her. "But somewhere like this, with you." "I dared to hope." "I am glad you came to my ranch that day," Adelaide said. "I am glad you took a chance on a woman the whole town thought was crazy." "You were not crazy," Grant said. "You were brave. You still are. You taught me that living by your own rules does not mean being alone. It means finding people whose rules align with yours." "Your rules," Adelaide said with a smile. "Treat people fairly, do what you say you will do, stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves." "Simple rules," Grant said, "but they have served us well." "They have," Adelaide agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky deepened from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to appear, one by one, like the dreams they had built together over the years. Adelaide thought about the young woman she had been, standing in her father's doorway with a rifle, defying the men who wanted to take her land. She thought about Grant riding up that day, offering his skills and his respect without judgment or conditions. She had been ostracized for living by her own rules, but she had found a man who lived by rules she could respect. Together, they had built something that neither could have achieved alone: a ranch, a family, a life of purpose and meaning. "I love you," Adelaide said. "I love you too," Grant replied. He kissed the top of her head. "Always." As full darkness fell over the Montana landscape, Adelaide and Grant remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms and in the life they had chosen. It had not been an easy path, but it had been theirs. They had faced prejudice, injustice, and hardship, but they had faced it together. And in doing so, they had proved that sometimes the most radical act is simply choosing to live honestly, to love deeply, and to stand firm in your convictions. The ranch prospered for decades to come. Daniel took over the daily management when Grant and Adelaide grew too old for the hard physical labor, but they remained involved and respected voices in all decisions. The twins both married and had children of their own, and the ranch became home to multiple generations of the Morrison family. Grant lived to be 73, and Adelaide held his hand when he died peacefully in their bed one winter morning. She grieved deeply, but without regret. They had been blessed with 30 years of marriage, and every one of those years had been full of love, respect, and partnership. She wore his silver ring until her own death 5 years later, and she was buried beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to run the ranch, carrying on the values that Grant and Adelaide had embodied. Fairness, honesty, courage, and the belief that people should be judged by their character rather than their circumstances. The Morrison Ranch became known throughout Montana, not just for its quality livestock, but for its fair treatment of workers and its willingness to give opportunities to those whom society had overlooked. And in the town of Butte, which had once ostracized Adelaide Zimmer for refusing to conform, her story became legend. She was remembered as the woman who had stood up to corruption and prejudice, who had run a successful ranch in an era when women were not supposed to be capable of such things, and who had found love with a man who had seen her strength rather than being threatened by it. Their story was passed down through generations as a reminder that sometimes the most important rules to follow are not the ones society imposes, but the ones written in your own heart. That true partnership means respecting each other's strengths and supporting each other through weaknesses. That love is not about possession or control, but about choosing every day to stand beside someone and face whatever comes together. The mountains still stand over Montana, enduring and eternal. The grasslands still roll out under vast skies. And somewhere in that landscape, if you know where to look, you can still find the Morrison Ranch, still thriving, still embodying the values that Adelaide and Grant built into its foundation all those years ago. It was a legacy of courage, integrity, and love. A legacy built by a woman who refused to surrender her independence, and a man who understood that true strength means supporting others in their journey rather than trying to control them. Together, they proved that you do not have to choose between freedom and partnership, between independence and love. You simply have to find someone whose rules align with yours, whose respect matches your own, and whose heart beats in rhythm with the life you want to build. And that, in the end, is the greatest love story of all.